Right now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered the State of the Nation address, a speech that has received mixed reviews. We're joined for reaction in studio by researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice, Zimbali Mncube, and energy and infrastructure expert Ruse Moleshe, as well as governance expert Miyelani Holeni. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, a lot has been said as we watched the reaction, some big promises made. As we looked at some of the reaction from political parties, some were saying, same old, nothing has changed. What did you make of it as you listened?
Well, I think that the president is re-emphasizing some of the things. So from that perspective, you could say that things have not changed. Talking about governance and oversight and strengthening of that, especially state-owned enterprises, by forming this coordinating body that will look at CEOs, appointments, board members, and that kind of thing. And then it touched on funding issues that relate to project preparation, mobilizing resources from outside of South Africa through the infrastructure fund. He spoke really about capacity within municipalities to be able to deliver on infrastructure, including electricity and all others. And I think one of the other areas he touched on was competition, bringing competition into the market, state independent power producers, and enhancing that.
Yeah, and from an economics perspective, I mean, we heard Ramaphosa saying that investors are looking at South Africa with more interesting eyes. Did you get a sense that there was some sort of balance as he made his address this evening?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mpo. I think for me, I was looking at this SONA at the back of the cabinet Lekgotla last week, which discussed the medium-term development plan, which is the government's program of action for the next 5 years. So I was hoping to see what are the key pillars that will govern this plan. And I think I picked up two strands that run across the State of the Nation address tonight. And one of them is this massive drive for infrastructure development and the reform of SOEs. And this will be done through a massive investment fund, I think over 900 billion that was announced.
Yeah.
But the key concern that I think we've raised in our statement, which we released on Tuesday, was that much of the infrastructure development is driven through blended finance, which the president acknowledged, as well as public-private partnerships. And these are very controversial mechanisms to deliver infrastructure because of the risks that they pose to the fiscus and to the environment, as well as to equal accessibility to public services, because they depend on user fees to run their operations. If you look at Gautrain, for instance, is one of the key examples of a PPP, which is a failure because you can see who accesses it and the prices there that are excluding a large majority of our society in terms of accessing quality transport. And so we worry as to whether this is the right mechanism to deliver infrastructure, although we welcome the increased focus that is given to infrastructure development, given the backlogs that we are experiencing as a country. Yeah. The second point that I noted was that the president has acknowledged the key areas in which the government is making strides, and these include in the areas of the SRD grant, which he said is going to be used as a stepping stone for a basic income support. There's also the ongoing efforts to build more hospitals. That's a positive, as well as the acknowledgement of the impact of the Presidential Employment Stimulus Fund, which has given opportunities to young people that were previously outside of the labor market. And then more broadly, the social wage and how healthcare, education, and those services are providing support to those who cannot access them on their own in the private sector. The worry that we have in this area is that despite some of the positive impact of these programs, what we've seen in the national budget is that the president will set forward some ambitions, proclaim the successes of these programs. But when it comes to the budget, which we are looking forward to in the next week, the Minister of Finance doesn't match the ambitions that have been put forward by the President. And we see that there are successive cuts, particularly to healthcare and education. You know, just last week, Minister Aaron Motsoaledi acknowledged that, yes, there are over 1,800 unemployed doctors, but he can't simply employ them because there's no money to pay for them, right?
Absolutely.
And
in fact, we will continue that. I'd like to bring in our other guest who's weighing in, governance expert Miyelani Holeni. A very good evening to you. Welcome. I mean, just listening to some of the promises that President Cyril Ramaphosa has made this evening, what stood out for you?
Well, I think for me, I'll take, the leaf, from the local government, which is, the sector that, we spend quite a lot of our effort in. The reforms, certainly to local government, white paper of 1998 is a significant admission that the assumptions that were made in the local government white paper, with times having moved, so far, are no longer as valid as they were. In fact, some of them require new data or can use new data to drive all of that. But the key thing, I think, is it goes further to look at the design of how local government and municipalities must start functioning going forward, because we see municipalities as, engines of growth, that must be supported and must receive, sufficient funding. And the second part to it is the financing of local government. We know that, local government enjoys less than 10% of the fiscus, and it has to find, about 90% of that, money through their own sources of revenue, which is not possible. So I think for us, the ring fencing of some of that revenue that is supposed to go back and service the payments, to ESCOM or to the water boards and so on is a significant step in the right direction. Of course, the other parts, that, I picked up, as well, is more around infrastructure. Yeah. And I think here, water, is quite, a huge area that the president, has also put up, quite a lot of speech, from the building of bridges, to the pipeways, to bring water into the Val water scheme, which is, bringing it, into Gauteng and the other regions which are water starved. As well as, investing, in the certainty of bringing water to communities, and I name a town I come from, Guyana, which has suffered, quite a lot. So I think those pronouncements, from the president, and also to the electricity side, also bragging a bit, around, keeping the lights on, but also acknowledging that there's still a lot of work to be done around, the electricity reforms. Of course, the new Electricity Act, plays a crucial role towards increasing the number of generation points, for electricity.
Ruse, I see you nodding your head. I mean, this is your area of expertise here. As we really just hone in on what Ramaphosa has had to say, Miyelani, touching on some of the factors there, we saw load shedding at the weekend, a reminder that the energy supply is constrained, but, a lot was touched on this evening insofar as what the president had to say. What are your thoughts around some of those ideas, also speaking to the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act?
Yes, so the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act, as I mentioned earlier on, emphasizing the bringing in of competition into the market, that is the independent power producers, to reduce the burden on government in terms of delivering of infrastructure. Yes, that we already know, and it was through the promulgation of the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act that has been emphasized, but we must remember that we do have constraints in that market in bringing in that competition. For instance, he mentioned the 14,000 kilometers of transmission infrastructure that's needed in a decade to be able to connect those projects that will be developed. So developing the projects on the generation side and then realizing we don't have infrastructure to connect them is the next challenge that we're facing. And also on the collection of revenues from the state-owned enterprises, which we say will focus on providing strategically public services. We know that collection from municipalities, for ESCOM, for instance, is threatening the sustainability of the entity to be able to deliver on that. that. So, as I said, the president has said everything else that we've heard.
Yeah.
But the devil will be in the detail, or at least the implementation side has proven in the past not necessary to fall in line with the actual pronouncements.
And Zimbali, which was some of the concerns that you were raising here as you speak about all well and good to have this grand plan, but you've expressed some concerns around how the mechanisms will be enacted here. And Miyelani touched a little bit on what was in fact quite a broad topic by the president, water. We know that Ramaphosa says 23 billion rand has been secured for 7 large water infrastructure projects. Looking at that and the dire need for water in South Africa, and of course concerns around implementations, concerns around the mechanisms of finance. I mean, in terms of bringing some perspective to this factor, the relevance of water is something that urgently needs to be addressed, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I mean, water is essential to life and creating life. And so it's an important priority. And I acknowledge that the president has focused on that. That's a key positive. What we need to question is whether the delivery of infrastructure development, particularly in centering the private sector, is aligned with some of our social priorities, and whether or not these stakeholders are really invested in providing and ensuring that people have access to water, or they are prioritizing profits. And I think evidence internationally proves that it's actually more towards the latter. And so it will be important for the president and the GNU at large and the relevant department to actually show us what is the framework that underpins their partnerships with the private sector, and make them publicly available so that citizens and civil society can hold them accountable to some of these projects, and as well as the impacts they have on the environment. I think what we're also missing alongside this over-reliance of the private sector and the impact it has on the capacity of the state is a lack of innovative measures from the state itself to raise revenue that can actually help us boost essential projects such as the delivery of water, public employment programs, and so on. I think although one does not expect the president to go at length about financing mechanisms, I think it would have been given us hope if the president had at least hinted how the state will take measures to raise revenue as is set out in the Constitution, you know, including considering measures such as taxing the wealthy to ensure that we redistribute income from the wealthy to the poorest in our society.
In fact, let me bring Miyelani in. Just listening to that, and also really understanding how what Zimbali is saying resonates with aspects of accountability, and of also noting the area of corruption and state capture that the president touched on this evening. Also, you know, brings about well, you know, there's a thread that really binds these conversations together. You talk about billions of rands in investment, and questions about the mechanisms and sense of accountability also tie us back to the question around corruption and state capture.
Yeah, I think, you know what, I think the president, you know, was at pains, you know, to put forward. Of course, you know, in terms of, you know, the 3 pillars, it talks about a capable as well as a developmental state, which is aiming to build. And I think key to that, you know, is the issue of skills, is the issue of attracting people. But the other thing he also mentioned around the use of technology in terms of, you know, curbing leakages in terms of funds. You know, it talks about, you know, the fact that, you know, using AI, you know, they've been able to at least, you know, prevent, you know, quite a huge sum of money that, you know, would have disappeared. I think about 95 billion of impermissible funds. And they talk about a recovery of about 20 billion in terms of, you know, funds, you know, through use of technology. And of course, you know, it's too late in the game to want to go into recovery. But I think the detection of all of these items of fraud or leakages within the framework is what, you know, I think is trying to emphasize. And of course, the work of, the Financial Action Task Force is one that he also touched upon, because that facilitates, not even just, leakages internally in the country, but also, money laundering that, would go into certain countries, especially into vulnerable areas, which are war-prone, to go and finance, different wars within there. So I think the issue of, having a strong governance framework was mentioned as well within the SOCs. But broadly, I think government needs to have, that strong governance, framework. And I think that's what the president was trying to hint at, to say that they are trying to close all of the different areas, including using law enforcement, as well as using proactive measures of reforming the governance, models within government itself, all the way up to the SOCs and the institutions that support, government. Seeing that, as well, the assets forfeitures, were mentioned, also in the speech. That is positive, I think, from at least building a capable and ethical state point of view.
And Ruse, did you get a sense of confidence as the president, spoke about how we need to ensure that SOEs like Eskom and Transnet, which are vital for the economy to function optimally, that, it's important to ensure that there is long-term energy security. And lots of questions have come from some of the politicians who are on the ground, just saying it's all very well to talk about things but not reveal the finer details of how all of this will be achieved. I mean, just also looking for one at Transnet and the finer details. Is there a sense of confidence? I mean, we've gone about 300 days without load shedding. Just, I don't know how many days we count off what we experienced at the weekend.
Yeah. Well, infrastructure is a long-term game, and planning is very critical to infrastructure. Yes, the president recognizes that we've had bottlenecks and we're fixing them, but we have to have an eye on the outlook, on the future, because we have to plan now for the future. So, for instance, one of the action plans that the president has, one of the elements of that is that we'll bring in technology like battery energy storage, we'll bring in gas, we'll bring in other different technologies. However, if you look deeply into the gas and infrastructure and the requirements, that's not something that can happen today. And really, in terms of regulatory framework, those are things that are not advanced properly. So yes, at a high level, at a framework level, and with some progress that we've made, we welcome that. But we need a lot more urgency in planning for the future so that we avoid load shedding rather than celebrating having overcome it in the future. Okay.
You touched a little bit on SRD. But we know that the president was saying that we are a nation where no one goes hungry, and he spoke about how more than 28 unemployed and vulnerable people receive social assistance. And on the other end, we still have that unemployment factor.
Yeah, no, that's true. I think our social security system is one of the best in the world, which it is a positive, but it also speaks to actually the scale of the unemployment rate that we have. And so our emphasis on the SRD, we're looking at it as more of a stopgap whilst we are actually working out a job creation strategy, which I think the president didn't delve on too much today. We need that SRD to protect livelihoods of those that are between the ages of 18 and 59. And I think we were vindicated by the judgment that was handed down in the Pretoria High Court, where SERI, IEJ, and #Pray the Grants were challenging some of the measures and the barriers that were put in place by the National Treasury and the DSD, so that people cannot access the grant. Over 7 million people were excluded to access this grant. And so I think we need to really, instead of the state challenging or appealing this judgment, we need to sit down with the state and some of the key stakeholders in this process to ensure that people can access this grant, because it's not just a grant that you hand out to people. People actually use it to stimulate their local economies. Yeah. Some people use it to invest in their livelihood strategies, whether it's selling veggies on the side of the road or selling ice cream, which is a story we had in the past 2 years, SONA. We still see that there's no ambition to scale this grant, not only in value such that it reaches the food poverty line, which currently sits as around 796 rands, but the grant is like 370, which even if you double it, it's still below the food poverty line. So I think we need to marry that intervention with a clear and credible job creation strategy. And I think that entails massive investment, not only in infrastructure, but in labor intensive sectors of the economy, such as manufacturing, such as construction, as well as supporting SMMEs, like the President mentioned, in the tourism sector. And I think those are the sort of coordinated, multifaceted, innovative strategies that we need to tackle the problem of unemployment in our country. There's no silver bullet that will help us achieve it, but it's a multifaceted intervention that we need from this government.
In supporting SMMEs, I mean, and looking at some of the loopholes within the energy sector and infrastructure, I mean, does that provide a sense of, you know, an encouragement that there are opportunities within that sector for I mean, I heard the President also speaking about supporting SMMEs and women-led businesses. Is there room to grow there?
Well, the infrastructure sector is quite capital intensive, and also in terms of funding it, banks will require people with experience. So there is a need to intervene in a very specific way in there. Yes, he mentioned manufacturing, for instance, in the green economy, there might be opportunities there, but those would be for SMMEs. If you want big players that also, from a transformation point of view, participate in that sector, there's certain interventions that need to be done. But I think it's a good start that there is a fund that is specifically dedicated to looking at transformation, to looking at BAE. Hopefully there'll be lessons from that with the next or future rolling out of that, there will be improvements. There are opportunities for entrepreneurs throughout the value chain in the energy sector. There are those that are participating in the renewable energy IPP procurement program. For instance, there is now a pilot that has been launched on the transmission side by National Treasury to test a PPP model, and there could be opportunities for that, but we need to learn from the lessons that we've learned now to see how do we make sure that there is real participation. Yeah,
absolutely. Miyelani, just bringing you in, I mean, we heard right at the beginning the ANC MPs applauding quite loudly when Ramaphosa declared that South Africa will not be bullied and will stand up for its national interest and sovereignty. Of course, this was all in response to US President Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's quite a serious statement and a bold statement from the president, because I think, the gags that, have been coming through from all the different angles, including our very own South African who has deserted us in Elon Musk. And the fact that, the president has also picked up on it, the Secretary of State has picked up on it, and so on. So there's a diplomatic war of some sort, that, we need to at least, be very resolute as we approach it, because the issue here is that, South Africa supporting, areas which, the America or the US is not in support of. South Africa being part of the BRICS community, South Africa being resolute around, the Gaza, Palestine issues there. So I think, the president has done well to flag the issue, to show that, he has at least an understanding of what, the issues are. But the other part, to it is that, the president also has to protect the fact that, we are the we have the chairmanship of the G20, and the next, country that takes over the G20 is the US. So there's also a trading, of sorts, that the president, also had to put forward. But I think the message was clear, and I think it landed, very well with regards, to the rest of, the world that are looking at South Africa. I mean, we're one of the countries that have taken countries to the International Criminal Court. So one of those things is that we're showing that we're continuing to clap above our weight, and be able to drive, the message, to the rest of the international community that, we are a player and a serious player for that matter.
And also looking at how Ramaphosa, right at the beginning there, naming each and every soldier, the 14 soldiers that lost their lives in the DRC by name, and having some heckling from some of the political parties there. That in itself, and the manner in which it was handled, and all the reporting that has led up to this point, what did you make of the manner in which it was addressed this evening?
Well, I think the president, always shows a very empathetic, side, to himself. Always is someone who is very much in touch, with and understanding the suffering of the citizenry, not only in South Africa, but across, the world. So I think, it was quite warm of him and quite, benevolent of him to be able to mention each and every one. But I think the more important message that he also was trying to bring out, is the fact that, as a country, we are supporting efforts, to silence the guns, as he put it. And I thought it was much more bold, because he linked, the statement, of naming the soldiers, with the fact that, if you silence the guns, it means that, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area will thrive, trade will happen, and all of that. So he's actually showing that, those, soldiers are the ones that are going to make it possible for Africa to start, thriving and to work together and to quieten, all of, the wars and create stability, of which, stability is a crucial issue for the continent at the moment. The standoffs, that, are currently happening in different areas, are not helping Africa to develop or to grow from there off. We've also seen, for instance, the countries like Burkina Faso and the likes, where the military have taken over because, they want to at least, uplift, the citizens. So the issues here is that, it links up the message that, our soldiers, are unfortunately lost their lives, but not in vain.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we round down the conversation here in studio, I mean, I can see both of you nodding and just listening along, but at the end of it all, Ramaphosa was saying that political parties have set aside their differences and agreed to work together for the benefit of the country. And a lot was also said this evening about how South Africa's got such great policies, but they lack on implementation. What would you like to see, on the back of this address and these promises going forward, so that when we come back to talk about it next year, that there is some sort of strides that have been made? What are the focal areas?
So I'm quite impressed that we really recognize the importance of infrastructure, whether it's the telecoms, whether it's ports, whether it's water, as an input to the economy. We can't grow without that. So that's encouraging. And the fact that the resources have been put aside to look at that. I would like us to focus more on making sure that we plan for the future, as infrastructure is a long-term game. And as we plan, we monitor how we are delivering, so that we can go back and readjust the plans, not just have them on paper. And when they are not working, like I mentioned, for instance, on gas, there are a lot of things that are outstanding with respect to that. We're still piloting the transmission infrastructure and all of that. So we need to understand that we need to plan far ahead so that we start implementation and therefore avoid having a crisis and having to fix all the time.
And for you, Zimbali?
Yeah, no, I think for me, the first point is I'm not sure if we have like the best policies. I think if we did, it would be not only an issue of implementation, but also our ambition in these policies, and whether or not our government is actually playing a coordinated role to bring about the policies. I think we also have a challenge of a national treasury that is actually imposing its authority and holding the country at ransom in terms of imposing budget cuts across the board and in different departments. And I think that needs to stop, and we need to see the president acting up and actually leading us with new policies that don't just target debt stabilization through budget cuts, but actually bring about job creation. We need to take measures to raise revenue. and not just say there's no money, but actually look at the massive concentration of wealth in the country that we are not taxing, and how we can use that potentially to fund some of the priorities that the president identified. We also need to review inefficient spending that currently is taking place.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't just say the state needs to spend, but we need to also acknowledge that there are those areas, whether it's a problem of governance or backlogs in the municipality level. We need to address what are the programs that are failing and how can we use that to also raise funds. When you look at a program like the employment tax incentive, there is no evidence as to what impact has it brought about, how many young people have benefited from it, and has it played a role in alleviating youth unemployment. I mean, if we cancel that program, how much can we raise, and where can that money go? And I think for me, the key point is that evidence needs to be the center of our policy making, not just ideological inclination.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on the conversation and also giving us your point and perspective as we wrap that discussion up. We're joined there by researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice, Zimbali Mncube, energy and infrastructure expert Ruse Moleshe, as well as governance expert Miyelani Holeni, who joined us via Teams. But we do thank you for your time and continue on this end to bring you more reaction on the ground in the wake of President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. Stay with us.